The billionaire CEO walked away from her, not because love was gone. "I don't want to ruin this," he says, his voice breaking on the last word. The apartment was quiet except for the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that has long since gone cold. Her stillness was a stark contrast to his restless energy. The way he couldn't quite meet her eyes, the way his fingers tap against his thigh in an uneven pattern. "What exactly do you think you'll ruin?" she asks, her voice steady. Not accusatory. Not pleading. Just curious, as if she was trying to understand a complex equation. He looked up then, finally, and the fear in his eyes is so raw it made her breath catch. "Us," he whispers. "Me. This feeling that I can actually breathe when I'm with you." She nodded slowly, understanding washing over her face. This isn't about another woman. This isn't about falling out of love. This is about a man terrified of his own capacity for peace. "You're not running from me," she says softly. "You're running from yourself." He didn't deny it. Can't deny it. Instead, he stood, gathered his coat, and walked to the door. Paused with his hand on the knob, as if waiting for her to stop him. To fight. To make promises that would let him stay without facing his own demons. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She lets him go with the quiet understanding that fear cannot be loved out of someone. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounds like an ending. But this isn't where their story begins. 5 years earlier, Olivia Gates sat alone in an airport cafe, her laptop open to a spreadsheet that required her attention despite the 3-hour flight delay scrolling across the monitors. Around her, other stranded travelers performed their frustration in various ways: loud phone calls, dramatic sighs, impatient pacing between gates. Olivia simply worked, sipping her tea with the kind of calm that comes from knowing impatience never changes outcomes. She had survived enough in her 32 years to understand that most inconveniences were just that, inconveniences. Not catastrophes. Not worth the energy of outrage. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her concentration. "Is this seat taken?" She looked up to find a man gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his temples, dressed in the uniform of tech success, expensive jeans, casual button-down, watch that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But his eyes were kind, if uncertain, and the cafe was filling with delayed passengers seeking refuge. "It's all yours," she replied, moving her bag to make space. "Thanks." He sat down, placed his own laptop on the table. "I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Reeves. Olivia Gate. Nice to meet you, Olivia." He smiled, a genuine expression that softened the intensity of his features. "Thanks for sharing your table. And for not being one of the people having a meltdown over a delay no one can control." She laughed softly. "Life's too short to waste energy on things you can't change." "Wise words," he agreed. "Though I admit I'm usually more in the impatient camp." "I'm working on it." "How's that going for you?" she asked, closing her laptop to give him her full attention. "Terribly," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm told I have control issues." "Most successful people do," Olivia observed. His eyebrows rose slightly. "What makes you think I'm successful?" She gestured vaguely toward him. "The confidence. The watch. The way you introduced yourself like someone who's used to people recognizing your name." A flush crept up his neck, and for a moment he looked almost embarrassed. "That obvious, huh?" "It's not a criticism," Olivia assured him. "Just an observation." "Fair enough." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with new interest. "And what about you? What does Olivia Gatito when she's not calmly handling flight delays?" "I run a non-profit that provides arts education in underserved schools," she replied. "Less glamorous than whatever you do, I'm guessing, but fulfilling." That sounds incredibly worthwhile, Ethan said, and she was surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. And probably more meaningful than building another tech platform the world doesn't really need. Is that what you do? Build tech platforms? He nodded. Co-founder of ReevesLink. I know what ReevesLink is, Olivia interrupted, recognition dawning. You're that Ethan Reeves. The networking platform for creative professionals. Guilty, he admitted. Though we prefer to call it a collaborative ecosystem. Of course you do, she teased gently. Silicon Valley loves its ecosystems. He laughed, a surprised sound that suggested he wasn't used to people speaking to him without deference. You're not impressed, are you? Should I be? Olivia asked, genuinely curious. Most people are, he said, and there was something refreshing about his honesty. It's actually nice to just be a guy in an airport cafe for a change. Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from professional backgrounds to travel stories to deeper waters, the weight of ambition, the search for meaning beyond success, the strange loneliness that can exist even in a crowded room. When their flights were finally called, hers to Boston, his to San Francisco, they exchanged numbers with the casual promise of, if you're ever in my city. Neither expected anything to come of it. Both were wrong. If you've ever felt the strange contradiction of wanting connection while fearing what it might demand of you, take a moment to like and subscribe. This story explores the courage it takes not just to love someone else, but to let yourself be truly known. 3 months later, Ethan found himself in Boston for a conference. He texted Olivia on impulse, not expecting her to remember him, certainly not expecting her to be free for dinner on such short notice. She was both. They met at a small restaurant in the North End, away from the conference crowds and industry networking. Olivia arrived in a simple dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, no makeup beyond a touch of lipstick. She looked exactly as he remembered, quietly confident, present in a way few people manage to be in an age of constant distraction. So, she said after they'd ordered, how's the conference? Disrupting anything interesting? Ethan laughed. You know, for someone who runs a non-profit, you have a pretty cynical view of tech. Not cynical, Olivia corrected. Just realistic. There's a difference between technology that solves actual problems and technology that creates new ones while claiming to solve the old. And which category does ReevesLink fall into? He asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. She considered this seriously. I think it depends on how you measure success. If it's by user growth and market valuation, you're clearly winning. If it's by whether people's lives are meaningfully better because of your platform. She shrugged. That's harder to quantify. Most people in Ethan's world wouldn't dare speak to him so directly. Would couch criticism in flattery, would hedge and qualify to avoid offending someone with his influence and resources. Olivia's straightforwardness was both refreshing and slightly unnerving. You don't pull punches, do you? He observed. Life's too short for that too, she replied with a small smile. Does my honesty bother you? No, Ethan said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. It's actually refreshing. Most people tell me what they think I want to hear. That sounds exhausting, Olivia said. For both of you. It is, he agreed. Though I probably don't make it easy for people to be honest with me. I've been told I can be intimidating. You don't intimidate me, Olivia said simply. I'm beginning to see that, Ethan replied, a smile tugging at his lips. The question is, why not? Olivia took a sip of her wine, considering. I think it's because I've already survived the worst version of myself. After that, other people's success or status just doesn't seem that scary. The statement, delivered so matter-of-factly, caught Ethan off guard. That's quite a perspective. It's just the truth, Olivia said. We all have our stories. Mine involved some dark chapters before I figured out who I wanted to be. I'm guessing you have yours too. Ethan nodded, suddenly feeling exposed in a way business meetings and media interviews never managed to make him feel. I do. Though I'm not sure I've reached the figured out who I want to be part yet. Most people haven't, Olivia assured him. It's a process, not a destination. Their conversation continued through dinner, through dessert, through a walk along the waterfront as the city lights reflected on the harbor. Ethan found himself sharing things he rarely discussed, his working-class upbringing, his drive to prove himself, his fear that success would prove as empty as struggle had been difficult. Olivia listened without judgment, offered insights without platitudes, and by the time he walked her to her door, Ethan knew with unexpected certainty that he wanted to see her again. Not because she was impressed by him, she clearly wasn't, but because for the first time in years, he felt like himself. Not the CEO. Not the success story. Just Ethan. I'm in New York next month, he said as they stood on her doorstep. It's not Boston, but I could meet you there, Olivia offered. I have a friend I've been meaning to visit. I'd like that, Ethan said, surprised by how much he meant it. So would I, Olivia replied with a smile that stayed with him long after he'd returned to his hotel. What began as occasional meetings in various cities evolved over the next year into something neither had been looking for but both found themselves embracing. Their relationship didn't have the dramatic intensity Ethan had experienced in previous romances. The passionate arguments, the grand gestures, the constant need to impress. Instead, it felt stabilizing. Like coming home to a place he hadn't known he was missing. Olivia didn't need Ethan to perform success or confidence. Didn't shrink around his uncertainty or doubt. Didn't treat his achievements as defining features or his struggles as weaknesses to be hidden. She simply met him where he was, with a steadiness that allowed him to exhale without explanation. And that, paradoxically, terrified him. Because Ethan Reeves had built his life around momentum. Around the next goal, the next achievement, the next validation. He knew how to strive. Knew how to overcome. Knew how to turn struggle into fuel for ambition. He didn't know how to simply be. As Reeveslink continued its meteoric rise, as Ethan's profile in the tech world grew more prominent, Olivia remained unchanged, supportive but not impressed, proud but not defined by his success. She didn't orbit him the way others did. Didn't adjust her life to accommodate his growing demands. Didn't accept busy as a permanent state of being. What happens after you get what you want? She asked one evening as they lay in bed, the San Francisco skyline glittering beyond the windows of his penthouse. What do you mean? Ethan replied, his attention half on his phone as he scrolled through emails. I mean, you're building this company, expanding into new markets, chasing these growth metrics, Olivia elaborated. But what's the end goal? What happens when you've made it, by whatever standard you're measuring? Ethan laughed, a reflexive response to deflect a question he hadn't prepared for. I guess I'll buy a yacht and become insufferable. I'm serious, Ethan, Olivia persisted gently. What are you working toward? Not professionally, personally. What kind of life do you actually want? He set his phone down, suddenly uncomfortable. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it that way. Maybe you should, she suggested, not pushing but not retreating either. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're climbing a ladder without knowing what's at the top. The observation hit closer to home than Ethan wanted to admit. He changed the subject, made a joke, pulled her close to distract them both from a conversation that felt too exposing. But Olivia's question lingered, an uncomfortable splinter beneath the surface of his thoughts. What did happen after he got what he wanted? What if success didn't fill the spaces he expected it to? What if the restlessness that had driven him his entire life couldn't be satisfied by achievements or accolades or acquisitions? These questions, once awakened, refused to be silenced. And as they grew louder, Ethan began to pull away, not when things went wrong in their relationship, but paradoxically, when things went right. When comfort deepened. When intimacy strengthened. When Olivia's steady presence began to feel less like a harbor and more like an anchor. If this story of love and fear resonates with you, please comment below. Have you ever found yourself pulling away from something good because it asked you to be more vulnerable than you were ready to be? The shift was subtle at first. Longer hours at the office. More business trips. Shorter phone calls. Ethan framed his growing distance as focus, as responsibility, as the necessary sacrifice of building something important. But in his more honest moments, he recognized it for what it was: retreat. Not from Olivia, but from the version of himself that emerged in her presence. The version that questioned. That felt. That couldn't hide behind achievement or ambition. Olivia noticed the change before he acknowledged it. The pauses in conversation where connection used to flow. The way his gaze would drift to his phone when topics turned personal. The increasing frequency with which we became I in discussions about the future. She didn't confront him immediately. Didn't issue ultimatums or demands. Instead, she created space, not to test him, but to allow him to recognize what was happening. To make a conscious choice rather than a reflexive retreat. But the space she offered became a vacuum he filled with work, with travel, with the comfortable chaos of a life in constant motion. And the further he pulled away, the more clearly Olivia saw the pattern she'd missed in their early days. Ethan didn't know how to stay when things were calm. Didn't know how to exist without the adrenaline of crisis or the validation of achievement. Peace felt like exposure. Stability felt like vulnerability. The conversation, when it finally came, happened on a rare weekend when they were both in the same city at the same time. Ethan had been distant all evening, his mind clearly elsewhere despite his physical presence in Olivia's apartment. When she asked if something was wrong, the dam finally broke. "I think I need space," he said, the words coming out in a rush. Time to focus on the company. On the European expansion. On. He trailed off, unable to complete the list of justifications he'd prepared. Olivia didn't cry. Didn't argue. Didn't try to convince him he was making a mistake. She simply asked, "Is that really what you need, Ethan? Or is it what feels safer?" The question cut through his carefully constructed narrative, exposing the fear beneath. His voice shook when he finally responded, "I don't want to ruin this." And in those 5 words, Olivia heard everything he couldn't say directly: "I'm afraid of disappointing you. I'm afraid of not being enough. I'm afraid of what happens when the striving stops and I have to face who I really am." "You're not running from me," she said softly. "You're running from yourself." He didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it. Instead, he gathered his coat and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob as if waiting for her to stop him. To fight. To make promises that would let him stay without facing his own demons. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She let him go with the quiet understanding that fear cannot be loved out of someone. The weeks that followed were quiet, marked not by drama or conflict but by absence. Ethan threw himself into work with renewed intensity, into the European expansion, into the comfortable identity of the driven founder too busy for personal complications. He told himself it was temporary. That once things settled, once the next milestone was reached, once he had more clarity, he would reach out to Olivia again. But there was always another milestone. Another goal. Another reason to postpone the reckoning he knew awaited him if he allowed himself to slow down. Olivia, meanwhile, moved forward with the same steady purpose that had first drawn Ethan to her. She didn't chase him. Didn't try to convince him of his mistake. Didn't allow his absence to become the center around which her life revolved. She grieved, of course. Privately. Thoroughly. Giving the loss the respect it deserved without letting it define her future. Then she continued building the life she had been creating long before Ethan entered it. Expanding her nonprofit's reach, deepening her friendships, pursuing the quiet purpose that had always guided her choices. 6 weeks after Ethan walked out of her apartment, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news arrived not as a crisis but as an unexpected turn in a journey she had always navigated with intention. She sat with the knowledge for several days, considering her options with the same thoughtful clarity she brought to all significant decisions. She could tell Ethan. Should tell Ethan, perhaps. He had a right to know he had created a child. But what would that mean for the baby? For her. For the man who had left because stability terrified him more than loneliness. In the end, Olivia made her choice not from bitterness or revenge, but from a clear-eyed assessment of what would bring the most peace to the life growing inside her. Ethan had walked away from steadiness because he didn't know how to exist without chaos. A child deserved more than a father who might love fiercely but couldn't stay present when that love asked him to face himself. So she didn't call him. Didn't send a message that would force him to choose between responsibility and freedom. Instead, she prepared to raise her child alone, not as a statement or a punishment, but as an act of protection for both the baby and the man who wasn't ready to be the father this new life deserved. Mia Gate was born on a clear spring morning, entering the world with a calm curiosity that the nurses remarked upon. Such an alert baby, they said. So focused. So present. Just like her mother. Just like the father she might never know. Olivia built her life around Mia with the same intentional care she brought to everything that mattered. Their home became a haven of stability and gentle routine. Of books read aloud and questions answered honestly. Of art projects spread across the kitchen table and impromptu dance parties in the living room. Of consistent boundaries and unconditional love. As Mia grew from infant to toddler to little girl, Olivia watched Ethan's continued rise from a distance. Reeves Link expanded globally. Acquired smaller competitors. Eventually went public in an IPO that made headlines and minted new millionaires. Ethan's face appeared in business magazines and tech conferences, always with the same intense focus, the same driven expression, the same restless energy that had both attracted and concerned Olivia years earlier. She felt no resentment seeing his success. No bitterness about the life he had chosen over the one they might have built together. Only a quiet sadness for what he continued to miss, not just Mia, whom he didn't know existed, but the peace he kept outrunning in his pursuit of achievement. Mia, meanwhile, grew into a child who moved through the world with remarkable ease. Who didn't need constant stimulation or validation. Who could sit with a book for hours, absorbed in worlds beyond her own. Who approached challenges with patience rather than frustration. Who, at age 4, already showed signs of the emotional intelligence that had allowed her mother to recognize what her father could not admit, that some people run not from failure but from the vulnerability that comes with genuine connection. "Where's my dad?" Mia asked one evening as Olivia tucked her into bed. The question wasn't unexpected, Olivia had been preparing for it, but it still caught her slightly off guard. "Your dad lives far away," Olivia answered, choosing honesty without unnecessary detail. "He doesn't live with us." "Why not?" Mia persisted, her dark eyes, so like Ethan's, serious in her small face. Olivia considered her response carefully. "Because sometimes grown-ups aren't ready for the kind of love that children need. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Or even with him. It just means he wasn't ready to be the kind of father you deserve." "Will I meet him someday?" Mia asked. "I don't know, sweetheart," Olivia replied truthfully. "Maybe. When the time is right." Mia nodded, accepting this answer with the same calm acceptance she brought to most of life's complexities. "That's okay. We're good together, just us." "Yes," Olivia agreed, kissing her daughter's forehead. "We are very good together." And they were. Their life wasn't perfect, no life is, but it was steady. Grounded in values rather than appearances. Rich in meaning rather than material excess. Olivia's nonprofit thrived, expanding to serve schools across the Northeast. Mia started kindergarten, then first grade, bringing home art projects and math worksheets and stories about friends who didn't always understand her quiet confidence but respected it nonetheless. They built traditions together. Sunday morning pancakes. Summer picnics in the park. Holiday cookies delivered to neighbors. Small rituals that created continuity, that taught Mia that love wasn't just in grand gestures but in consistent presence. In showing up. In staying even when staying was difficult. If this story of choosing peace over chaos resonates with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us share more narratives that explore the quiet courage it takes to build a life of meaning rather than constant motion. 5 years after he walked out of Olivia's apartment, Ethan Reeves found himself in Boston again. Not for a conference this time, but for a potential acquisition, a small educational technology company that had developed an innovative platform for arts education in schools. The irony wasn't lost on him. The meeting was scheduled at the company's headquarters, a converted warehouse in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. As Ethan's driver navigated the unfamiliar streets, a familiar logo caught his eye, the stylized paintbrush and musical note of Olivia's nonprofit, Arts Access Initiative. "Stop the car," he said suddenly. The driver pulled over, looking confused. "Sir." "I'll walk from here," Ethan decided, gathering his briefcase. "The meeting's not for another hour." He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment after the car pulled away, staring at the modest storefront with its bright windows and children's artwork displayed proudly. 5 years. 5 years since he'd last seen Olivia. Since he'd walked away from the one relationship that had ever made him question the endless pursuit of more. Before he could reconsider, Ethan pushed open the door and stepped inside. The space was warm and inviting. Colorful walls covered in student artwork, comfortable furniture arranged in conversational groupings, the faint sound of music coming from a room down the hall. A young woman looked up from the reception desk with a welcoming smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for Olivia Gate," Ethan said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Is she available?" "Ms. Gate is in a meeting right now," the receptionist replied. "Did you have an appointment?" "No, Ethan began, then stopped as the door to the back hallway opened. And there she was. Olivia looked exactly as he remembered, yet somehow more herself. Her dark hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders. She wore a simple dress in deep blue, a silver pendant at her throat. But it was her presence that struck him most forcefully, the calm confidence, the centered stillness that had both drawn him to her and ultimately driven him away. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a neat braid and serious eyes that surveyed the room with quiet curiosity. She held Olivia's hand with the easy confidence of a child who has never had reason to doubt her place in the world. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs in a single exhale. He knew. He knew without being told. Without needing confirmation. Without any explanation beyond the unmistakable resemblance staring back at him from a face that combined Olivia's gentle features with his own more angular ones. This was his daughter. The child he hadn't known existed. The life he had walked away from before understanding what he was leaving. Olivia saw him then, her step faltering briefly before she recovered. No dramatic reaction. No visible panic. Just a slight tightening of her fingers around the little girl's hand and a measured breath that Ethan recognized as her way of centering herself. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm despite the unexpectedness of his appearance. "This is a surprise." "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced," he replied, struggling to maintain his own composure. "I'm in town for meetings and saw your office." His voice trailed off as his gaze returned to the child, who was studying him with an intensity that felt like looking in a mirror. Olivia followed his gaze, understanding immediately what he had already realized. "Mia," she said gently to the little girl, "this is Mr. Reeves. He's an old friend of mine." "Hello," Mia said politely, her voice clear and confident. "It's nice to meet you." It's nice to meet you too, Mia, Ethan managed, the name of his daughter, feeling strange and precious on his tongue. An awkward silence fell, heavy with unspoken questions and revelations too significant for a casual encounter in a public space. Mia, Olivia said after a moment, could you please ask Ms. Rivera to come out here? Tell her I need to speak with her for a minute. Mia nodded and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Ethan and Olivia alone in the reception area. She's mine, Ethan said quietly. Not a question. A recognition. Yes, Olivia confirmed simply. Why didn't you tell me? The question held no accusation, only genuine confusion. Olivia met his gaze directly, her expression open but resolute. Because you left, Ethan. Not towards something else, but away from stability. Away from the kind of steadiness that raising a child requires. I made the choice I thought was best for Mia. The truth of her words hit him with physical force. Not because they were cruel, they weren't, but because they were accurate. He had left. Had chosen the familiar chaos of ambition over the unfamiliar vulnerability of peace. Had run from the version of himself that emerged in Olivia's presence, the version that questioned, that felt, that couldn't hide behind achievement or momentum. And in doing so, he had missed 5 years of his daughter's life. Before he could respond, Mia returned with a young woman who greeted Olivia warmly. Carmen, could you take Mia to her art class? Olivia asked. I need to speak with Mr. Reeves privately. Of course, Carmen agreed, offering her hand to Mia. Come on, sweetie. Let's get you set up with the clay project. Mia looked between her mother and Ethan, that same serious assessment in her gaze. Will you come watch me make my sculpture later? She asked Olivia. Absolutely, Olivia promised. I'll be there in a little while. As Mia left with Carmen, Olivia turned to Ethan. We should talk. But not here. She led him to a small courtyard behind the building. A peaceful space with a few benches and potted plants, sheltered from the street noise. They sat side by side, not touching, a careful distance between them that felt both necessary and painful. She's beautiful, Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. She seems remarkable. She is, Olivia agreed, a mother's pride evident in her voice. She's thoughtful and curious and kind. She sees the world in ways that constantly surprise me. She has my eyes, Ethan observed quietly. And your focus, Olivia added. Your intensity when something interests her. Your ability to lose yourself completely in a project. The confirmation of these shared traits, these pieces of himself living on in a child he hadn't known existed, created a complicated ache in Ethan's chest. Pride and grief intermingled, joy and regret inseparable. I should have been here, he said, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what he had missed. Should have known her. Should have been part of her life. Perhaps, Olivia acknowledged. But you weren't ready, Ethan. Not for what being her father would have required of you. You don't know that, he countered, a flash of the old defensiveness surfacing briefly. Don't I? Olivia's voice remained gentle but firm. You left because stability terrified you more than loneliness. Because peace felt like stagnation. Because you didn't know how to exist without the constant validation of achievement or the familiar comfort of chaos. The assessment was so accurate, so devoid of bitterness yet so unflinching in its truth, that Ethan couldn't formulate a response. Couldn't deny what they both knew to be true. I'm not saying this to hurt you, Olivia continued. Or to justify not telling you about Mia. I made that choice based on what I believed was best for her, and I stand by it. But I also recognize that you had a right to know. That perhaps I should have given you the chance to choose differently than I expected you would. And now? Ethan asked, the question encompassing far more than he could articulate directly. What happens now? Olivia considered this carefully. That depends on what you want. And more importantly, on what you're ready for. Mia doesn't need a father who appears dramatically only to disappear when the reality of parenting becomes less exciting than the idea of it. She needs consistency. Presence. The willingness to show up not just for the milestones but for ordinary Tuesdays. I want to know her, Ethan said, the certainty in his voice surprising even himself. I want to be part of her life. Whatever that looks like. Whatever you think is appropriate. And what about your life in San Francisco? Olivia asked. Your company. The constant travel and 70-hour workweeks and priority shifts that come with running a global tech platform. The question wasn't accusatory but practical, a mother protecting her child from potential disappointment, from promises made but not kept. I don't know, Ethan admitted honestly. I don't have all the answers right now. But I do know that seeing Mia, seeing you again, it's made me realize something I've been avoiding for 5 years. What's that? That I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, Ethan said quietly. I left because I was afraid of who I became with you. The person who questioned whether success was enough. Who wondered what happened after achievement. Who couldn't hide behind momentum or ambition or the comfortable chaos I'd always used to avoid looking too closely at myself. Olivia's expression softened slightly, recognition flickering in her eyes. I know. You knew then, Ethan realized. That's why you let me go without fighting. Why you didn't chase me or try to convince me to stay. Yes, Olivia confirmed. Because fear can't be loved out of someone, Ethan. It has to be faced. And you weren't ready to face yours. And now, he asked. Do you think I'm ready now? Olivia studied him thoughtfully. I don't know. That's something only you can answer. But I do know that Mia deserves a father who is certain. Who has done the work to understand why he left in the first place. Who won't repeat the pattern when being her parent asks him to be vulnerable rather than impressive. The wisdom in her words, the absence of recrimination despite the magnitude of what his choices had cost them both, humbled Ethan in a way business setbacks and market challenges never had. This was the woman he had walked away from, steady, clear-eyed, capable of setting boundaries without cruelty. The woman who had raised their daughter with the same calm strength that had both attracted and terrified him years ago. I'd like the chance to prove I can be that father, he said finally. Not all at once. Not with grand gestures or promises I can't keep. But step by step. On whatever terms you think are best for Mia. Olivia nodded, considering his request with the careful thought she brought to all important decisions. We can start slowly. Supervised visits. Video calls. Building a relationship gradually so Mia has time to adjust to having you in her life. Thank you, Ethan said, the words inadequate for the opportunity she was offering. I won't disappoint her. Or you. I hope not, Olivia replied, her expression serious. Because while I can forgive you for walking away from me, I won't easily forgive you for hurting Mia. The protective fierceness in her voice, the mama bear beneath the calm exterior, reminded Ethan of everything he had admired about Olivia from the beginning, her clarity, her integrity, her unwavering commitment to what mattered most. As they walked back toward the building, toward the daughter he was just beginning to know, Ethan felt something shift inside him, a recognition that had been 5 years in the making. Olivia hadn't been holding him back all those years ago. She had been holding him steady. And he had mistaken steadiness for limitation, peace for stagnation, emotional courage for weakness. The realization came too late to reclaim what they had once shared. Too late to undo the years of absence from his daughter's life. But perhaps not too late to build something new, not the relationship he had abandoned, but a different kind of connection. One based on who they had become in the years apart. One centered around the extraordinary child who carried both their strengths and deserved both their love. As they entered the building, the sounds of children's voices drifted from the classrooms, laughter, questions, the beautiful chaos of creativity in progress. Olivia led him to a room where several children sat at tables, their small hands shaping clay into various forms with intense concentration. Mia looked up as they entered, her face brightening at the sight of her mother. "Mom! Look what I made." She held up a small sculpture, abstract but clearly formed with intention, with a complexity surprising for a child her age. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Olivia said, crossing to examine the creation more closely. "Tell me about it." As Mia explained her artistic choices with the vocabulary of someone well-versed in creative expression, Ethan watched from the doorway, struck by the easy rapport between mother and daughter. The way Olivia listened completely, asked thoughtful questions, validated Mia's perspective without empty praise. The way Mia spoke with confidence, unafraid of being wrong or misunderstood, secure in the knowledge that her thoughts mattered. This was what he had missed. Not just milestones and birthdays, but the everyday moments that shaped a child's understanding of her place in the world. The consistent presence that taught her she was worthy of attention, of respect, of love that didn't need to be earned through performance or achievement. Mia noticed him then, her explanation pausing as she studied him with that same serious assessment he was beginning to recognize as a trait they shared. "Do you want to see my sculpture, Mr. Reeves?" she asked, the politeness in her voice underlaid with genuine curiosity about his response. "I would love to," Ethan replied, moving closer at Olivia's subtle nod of permission. He knelt beside Mia's chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "It's very impressive." "It's abstract," Mia informed him solemnly. "That means it doesn't have to look exactly like something real. It can be about feelings or ideas." "I see that," Ethan said, matching her seriousness. "What feeling or idea were you thinking about when you made it?" The question seemed to please her. Not the generic praise adults often offer children, but a genuine inquiry into her creative process. "It's about balance," she explained, pointing to different elements of the sculpture. "See how these parts all work together? If you took one away, the whole thing might fall." The metaphor, so unconsciously profound coming from a 5-year-old, caught Ethan off guard. "That's a very thoughtful concept," he managed, glancing at Olivia, who watched their interaction with careful attention. "Mom says balance is important in art and in life," Mia continued, warming to her subject. "Like how we need both work time and play time. Both talking and listening. Both being with people and being quiet by ourselves." "Your mom is very wise," Ethan said, another piece of understanding falling into place. This was how Olivia had raised their daughter, with principles rather than platitudes, with values that would serve her long after childhood ended. "Are you going to come back again?" Mia asked suddenly, the directness of the question so reminiscent of Olivia that Ethan almost smiled despite the weight of the moment. He glanced at Olivia, seeking guidance. She gave a small nod, permission to answer honestly but carefully. "I'd like to," Ethan said. "If that would be okay with you and your mom." Mia considered this with the seriousness she seemed to bring to all decisions. "I think that would be okay. You seem nice. And you ask good questions about art." "Thank you," Ethan replied, unexpectedly touched by this simple assessment. "I think you're pretty nice too. And very talented." The art class ended soon after, with children gathering their creations and belongings as parents arrived for pickup. Ethan stood awkwardly to the side, watching as Olivia helped Mia collect her things, aware that his time with them was drawing to a close but reluctant to leave. "I have that meeting," he said as they walked toward the exit. "But I'd like to. I mean, would it be possible to? We could have dinner tomorrow," Olivia suggested, rescuing him from his uncharacteristic uncertainty. "At our apartment. Nothing formal. Just a chance for you to spend a little more time with Mia in a comfortable setting." The invitation, so much more than he had any right to expect after appearing unannounced in their lives, filled Ethan with gratitude. "I'd like that very much." 6 o'clock, Olivia said, writing an address on a small notepad from her purse. "Mia goes to bed at 8, so that gives you a couple of hours." I'll be there, Ethan promised, accepting the paper with a care that acknowledged it was more than just an address. It was an opening. A chance he hadn't earned but was being offered nonetheless. As he watched them walk away, Mia chattering about her day, Olivia listening with that complete attention she had always brought to conversations that mattered, Ethan felt the full weight of what his fear had cost him. 5 years of his daughter's life. The chance to build a family with a woman who had seen him clearly and loved him anyway. The opportunity to become someone defined by presence rather than achievement, by connection rather than acquisition. He had gained everything he thought he wanted: global success, industry recognition, financial security beyond most people's imagination. And he had lost what he hadn't known to value until it was too late. The steady love of a woman who didn't need him to be impressive, the chance to watch his daughter grow from her very beginning, the peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. If this story of recognition and second chances has touched something in you, please take a moment to share it with others who might be struggling with their own fears of vulnerability. Sometimes the most important stories are those that help us see ourselves more clearly. The dinner at Olivia and Mia's apartment the following evening became the first of many such gatherings over the weeks that followed. Ethan extended his stay in Boston indefinitely, delegating responsibilities to his executive team in San Francisco, conducting meetings virtually when necessary, prioritizing the nascent relationship with his daughter over the constant demands of his company for perhaps the first time in his career. The acquisition that had brought him to Boston was completed with less of his direct involvement than would have been typical, a test, perhaps, of whether Reeveslink could function without his constant attention. It did, of course. He had built a strong organization, had hired capable leaders, had created systems that didn't require his personal oversight of every decision. The revelation was both humbling and liberating. The company he had prioritized over everything else, that he had believed couldn't survive without his constant focus, continued to thrive even as he stepped back. Meanwhile, his relationship with Mia developed slowly, carefully, with Olivia's thoughtful guidance establishing boundaries that protected their daughter while allowing connection to grow. They started with simple activities: dinners at the apartment, visits to the park, weekend trips to museums and the aquarium. Ethan followed Olivia's lead, observing how she spoke to Mia, how she set limits with kindness but firmness, how she encouraged independence while providing security. He learned his daughter's rhythms and preferences, that she loved strawberries but disliked bananas, that she could spend hours with a book but grew restless during long car rides, that she approached new experiences with caution but enthusiasm once her initial wariness passed. He discovered the joy of being present for ordinary moments, helping with homework, listening to detailed explanations of art projects, celebrating small victories like a well-tied shoe or a newly mastered skill. And through it all, he watched Olivia, the mother she had become in his absence, the woman who had built a life of meaning and purpose without him. She maintained a careful distance between them, friendly but not intimate, co-parents rather than potential partners. Whether this was for Mia's protection or her own, Ethan couldn't be certain. He respected the boundary nonetheless, grateful for whatever role she was willing to allow him in their lives. 3 months into this new arrangement, as summer turned to fall and Mia started first grade, Ethan faced a decision he had been avoiding. His presence in Boston, while manageable in the short term, wasn't sustainable indefinitely. The company needed him back in San Francisco, at least periodically. His life, his home, his responsibilities, his carefully built empire, remained on the opposite coast. "We need to talk about what happens next," Olivia said one evening after Mia had gone to bed. They sat in her small living room, the remains of a family dinner still on the table, the comfortable domesticity of the scene a stark contrast to the uncertainty of their situation. "I know," Ethan acknowledged. "I've been thinking about it constantly." "And?" Olivia prompted gently. Ethan took a deep breath, organizing thoughts he had been wrestling with for weeks. "I want to be part of Mia's life. Consistently. Not just when it's convenient or when I can arrange my schedule around visits to Boston. I want to be her father in every way that matters." "I believe you mean that," Olivia said carefully. But the reality is, your life is in San Francisco. Your company. Your home. Everything you've built. Things can be rebuilt, Ethan replied, the certainty in his voice surprising them both. Companies can be run from different locations. Homes can be relocated. What can't be replaced is time with Mia. Moments I've already missed that I can never get back. Olivia studied him thoughtfully, searching for the truth beneath his words. What exactly are you suggesting, Ethan? I'm considering moving to Boston, he said simply. Not temporarily. Permanently. Opening an East Coast headquarters for ReevesLink. Buying a place near enough to be present in Mia's daily life but not so close that it feels like an intrusion on the life you've built. The proposal hung between them, its significance evident in Olivia's careful silence as she considered its implications. That's a major life change, she said finally. Are you sure it's what you want? What happens when the novelty wears off? When being a father becomes routine rather than a new challenge to master. The questions weren't accusatory but practical, the same clear-eyed assessment she had always brought to important decisions. The same protection of Mia's emotional well-being that had guided her choices from the beginning. I don't know, Ethan admitted honestly. I can't predict how I'll feel in a year or 5 years or 10. But I do know that these past 3 months have been the most meaningful of my life. That being Mia's father feels like the most important role I've ever had. That the thought of returning to my old life, the constant travel, the 70-hour workweeks, the endless pursuit of the next achievement, feels hollow in a way it never did before. Olivia nodded, acknowledging his sincerity without immediately accepting his proposal. And what about us? She asked quietly. Where do I fit in this new vision of your life? The question caught Ethan off guard. Not because he hadn't thought about it, but because he hadn't expected Olivia to address it so directly. That depends on you, he said carefully. On what you want. On whether there's any possibility that you could forgive me for walking away. For missing 5 years of Mia's life. For choosing fear over courage when it mattered most. I forgave you a long time ago, Ethan, Olivia replied, her voice gentle but honest. Holding on to anger or resentment would only have hurt Mia and me. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. And it isn't the same as rebuilding what was broken. I understand that, Ethan acknowledged. I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were. We're different people now. I'm just asking for the chance to show you who I've become. Who I'm still becoming. To see if there's a path forward that honors who we are now rather than who we were then. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, considering his words with the thoughtfulness he had always admired in her. I think, she said finally, that we should focus on co-parenting Mia effectively before we consider anything more complicated. On building trust through consistency and shared responsibility. On proving through actions rather than words that the changes you're describing are genuine and lasting. It wasn't a rejection. Wasn't a door closed permanently. But it was a boundary. Clear, reasonable, focused on their daughter's well-being rather than their own emotional needs. Ethan recognized the wisdom in it, the protection it offered all three of them from promises made too quickly or expectations set too high. That seems fair, he agreed. More than fair, given everything. So you're really considering moving to Boston? Olivia asked, returning to the practical implications of his proposal. Yes, Ethan confirmed. I've already spoken with my executive team about establishing an East Coast headquarters. About restructuring my role to allow for more delegation and less direct oversight. About creating a life that prioritizes being Mia's father over being ReevesLink's ever-present CEO. The certainty in his voice, the concrete steps he had already taken, seemed to reassure Olivia more than any emotional declaration could have. This wasn't an impulsive decision or a temporary adjustment. This was a fundamental shift in priorities, in life direction, in what he valued most. Mia would be thrilled to have you here permanently, she said, a small smile softening her expression. She asks every time you leave when you're coming back. And you? Ethan asked, unable to help himself. How would you feel about me being here permanently? Olivia considered the question with characteristic honesty. I think it would be good for Mia. And I think it might be good for all of us, to see what kind of family we can build together. Not the one we might have had if different choices had been made, but something new. Something that acknowledges who we've become in the years apart. It wasn't a declaration of love or forgiveness. Wasn't a promise of reconciliation or reunion. But it was an opening, a willingness to explore possibilities, to see what might grow in the space between who they had been and who they were becoming. And for Ethan, who had once walked away from the steadiness Olivia offered because he mistook it for limitation, it was more than he deserved. More than he had any right to expect. A second chance he hadn't earned but was being offered nonetheless. Thank you, he said simply, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what she was allowing. For Mia. For these past 3 months. For considering a future that includes me in ways I forfeited through my own choices. Olivia nodded, acknowledging his gratitude without dismissing it. We should take it one step at a time. See how the move goes. How Mia adjusts to having you as a consistent presence rather than a visitor. How we navigate co-parenting on a daily basis rather than during carefully planned visits. One step at a time, Ethan agreed. With Mia's well-being as our priority. As he left her apartment that night, as he walked through the quiet Boston streets toward the hotel that had been his temporary home for the past 3 months, Ethan felt a sense of clarity that had eluded him for years. Not the adrenaline rush of a new acquisition or the validation of market success, but something steadier. More grounded. More real. He was choosing to stay. To be present. To face the vulnerability that came with genuine connection rather than retreating into the familiar comfort of achievement and momentum. Not because it was easy or comfortable or without risk, but because he had finally recognized what his fear had cost him, and what courage might still allow him to build. A relationship with his daughter. A co-parenting partnership with the woman who had seen him clearly from the beginning. Perhaps, someday, if trust could be rebuilt and wounds could heal, something more. Not the life he had planned. Not the path he had charted with such careful ambition. But a life rich in meaning rather than metrics. In connection rather than acquisition. In the quiet joy of ordinary moments rather than the fleeting satisfaction of extraordinary achievements. A life where steadiness wasn't mistaken for limitation. Where peace wasn't confused with stagnation. Where the courage to stay was recognized as greater than the impulse to run. A life where fear no longer dictated his choices, because he had finally learned what Olivia had known all along. That some people leave not because love ends, but because courage doesn't arrive. That the hardest person to truly face is often yourself. That the most valuable legacy isn't built in boardrooms or balance sheets, but in the hearts of those who learn from you how to stay present even when presence requires vulnerability. That sometimes, if you're very fortunate, the world offers second chances to those who finally understand what they missed the first time around. If this story has resonated with you, if you've ever run from connection because vulnerability felt more threatening than loneliness, or if you've ever had the courage to offer someone a second chance they hadn't earned but genuinely deserved, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue bringing stories that remind us it's never too late to choose courage over fear, presence over escape, love over self-protection. 1 year later. The small house in Cambridge sat on a tree-lined street within walking distance of Olivia's nonprofit headquarters. It wasn't grand or imposing, 3 bedrooms, a modest yard, a front porch with comfortable chairs where neighbors often stopped to chat. But it was warm. Welcoming. A home rather than a showcase. Ethan sat on that porch now, laptop open but largely ignored as he watched Mia ride her bike up and down the sidewalk, her confidence growing with each pass. She had insisted on removing the training wheels last weekend, had endured several falls with determined resilience, and was now mastering the art of balance through sheer persistence. "Look, Dad," she called, executing a wobbly turn at the end of the block. "No hands." "Well, one hand." "I see you." Ethan called back, pride and anxiety mingling as he resisted the urge to rush to her side. "Remember what we talked about with the helmet strap?" Mia nodded, immediately adjusting the loose strap with the seriousness she brought to all safety matters. 6 years old now, she had grown taller, more articulate, more confident in the year since Ethan had moved permanently to Boston. But she retained the thoughtful nature, the quiet intensity, the emotional intelligence that had struck him so forcefully when they first met. The sound of the front door opening drew his attention. Olivia emerged with 2 mugs of tea, handing one to Ethan before settling into the chair beside him. "She's getting really good," she observed, watching Mia navigate another turn. "Your weekend lessons are paying off." "She's a natural," Ethan replied. "Fearless but not reckless. A good combination." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea, watching their daughter with the shared pride that had become familiar over the past year. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been adjustments, negotiations, occasional tensions as they figured out how to co-parent effectively, how to blend their different approaches to raising Mia, how to create a new kind of family that honored their unique history. Ethan had purchased this house 6 months after moving to Boston, after living in a temporary apartment while he established the East Coast headquarters of Reeves Link and settled into his restructured role as CEO. The location had been carefully chosen. Close enough to Olivia's apartment to make shared custody logistically simple, in a neighborhood with excellent schools and safe streets where Mia could thrive. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly it would become home to all 3 of them. It started with practical arrangements, Olivia and Mia staying over when winter storms made travel difficult, Ethan keeping Mia at the house when Olivia had work commitments that ran late. Then evolved into more regular patterns. Family dinners several nights a week, weekend outings that ended with all of them too tired to separate, movie nights that stretched into breakfast the next morning. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Olivia's presence in the house shifted from visitor to co-creator. Her books appeared on the shelves. Her favorite tea took up residence in the kitchen cabinet. Her input shaped decisions about furniture arrangements and paint colors and garden plantings. They hadn't planned it this way. Hadn't rushed toward reconciliation or reunion. Had focused, as Olivia suggested, on co-parenting effectively before considering anything more complicated. On building trust through consistency and shared responsibility. On proving through actions rather than words that the changes Ethan had made were genuine and lasting. But somewhere along the way, as trust rebuilt and wounds began to heal, something else had rekindled between them. Not the relationship they had shared years ago, but something new. Something based on who they had become during their time apart. Something that acknowledged their history without being defined by it. "The Boston office is outperforming projections this quarter," Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The educational technology division especially." Olivia smiled, recognizing the significance beneath the casual observation. The educational technology division had been her suggestion. A way to align Reeves Link's resources with meaningful impact rather than just market growth. Ethan had embraced the idea with enthusiasm, had dedicated substantial resources to developing platforms that served schools and nonprofits, had found unexpected fulfillment in creating technology that genuinely improved lives rather than just generated profits. "I'm not surprised," she replied. "The team you've built is exceptional. And the mission resonates with people in a way pure profit never could." "You were right," Ethan acknowledged, a phrase that had become easier for him to say over the past year. About meaning mattering more than metrics. About success feeling hollow without purpose behind it. "You would have figured it out eventually," Olivia said generously. "You were already asking the questions before everything happened." The delicate reference to their separation, to the years apart, to the choices that had cost them so much time together, hung briefly in the air. Not with bitterness or recrimination, but with the quiet acknowledgement of a shared history that had shaped them both. Maybe, Ethan conceded. But I'm not sure I would have had the courage to act on those questions without you and Mia. Without seeing what really matters through both of you. Olivia reached across the space between their chairs, her hand finding his in a gesture that had become more frequent in recent months. You've changed, she said simply. Not just in what you say, but in how you live. In the choices you make every day. The observation, delivered without drama but with genuine recognition, meant more to Ethan than any business accolade or market validation ever had. Because it came from the woman who had seen him most clearly from the beginning. Who had recognized both his potential and his limitations. Who had let him go when he couldn't stay and welcomed him back when he finally understood what he had left behind. I've been thinking, he said carefully, turning to face her more directly. About our living arrangement. Olivia's expression shifted slightly, a wariness entering her eyes that reminded Ethan of how much trust he had broken, how much work it had taken to rebuild even a portion of what they had once shared. What about it? It seems inefficient, he continued, choosing his words with deliberate care. You and Mia spending half your time here, half at your apartment. The constant packing and unpacking. The logistics of remembering which clothes and books and toys are in which location. Inefficient, Olivia repeated, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That's your argument? Efficiency? Well, that and... Ethan took a deep breath, vulnerability still not coming easily to him despite a year of practicing it daily. And I love having you both here. Not just Mia. You. I love the family we're building, however unconventional its beginning. I love who we are together, who I am when I'm with you. And I hoped, you might consider making it official. Making this your home too. Both of you. The proposal hung between them, not a grand romantic gesture, not a dramatic declaration, but a quiet invitation to continue the journey they had begun. To take another step toward the future neither had imagined possible a year ago. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful as she considered his words. Are you asking me to move in with you, Ethan? Or are you asking something else? The directness of her question, the clarity she had always brought to important conversations, made evasion impossible. Both, I think, he admitted. I'm asking you to move in. And I'm asking if you might be open, someday when you're ready, to considering something more permanent. Something that acknowledges what we've rebuilt together this past year. Marriage, Olivia said, naming the possibility he had approached obliquely. Eventually, Ethan confirmed. If that's something you might want. But I'm not proposing today. I'm not asking for an immediate yes. I'm just opening the door to the conversation. To the possibility. Olivia's gaze shifted to Mia, who had abandoned her bike in favor of examining something interesting in the neighbor's garden. What about Mia? How would we explain this change to her? Honestly, Ethan suggested. Age appropriately, but honestly. That her mom and dad care about each other. That we want to be a family together in one home. That this is a step we're taking because it feels right for all of us, not just because it's convenient or expected. The thoughtfulness of his response, the consideration of Mia's emotional well-being as the priority, seemed to reassure Olivia. She turned back to him, her expression softening. My lease is up next month, she said, a smile gradually spreading across her face. And Mia has been asking why we don't just stay here all the time anyway. Is that a yes? Ethan asked, hope rising despite his attempt to manage expectations. It's a yes to moving in, Olivia clarified. To seeing where this next step takes us. To continuing the journey we've been on this past year. She squeezed his hand gently. The rest. We'll take that one day at a time. The way we've taken everything since you came back into our lives. The measured response, the careful balance of openness and boundary setting, was so quintessentially Olivia that Ethan couldn't help but smile. This was the woman he had walked away from years ago, thoughtful, clear-eyed, unwilling to be rushed into decisions that mattered. The woman whose steadiness he had once mistaken for limitation but now recognized as her greatest strength. One day at a time, he agreed. With no expectations beyond continuing to build something meaningful together. Dad. Mom. Mia's voice interrupted their conversation as she ran up the porch steps, something clutched carefully in her hands. Look what I found. A butterfly was just sitting on the sidewalk. I think its wing is hurt. They both leaned forward to examine the creature resting in Mia's cupped palms. A monarch butterfly with a slightly tattered wing, beautiful despite its imperfection. We should help it, Mia declared with the certainty of a child who believes all problems have solutions if enough care is applied. Can we keep it until it's better? Ethan and Olivia exchanged glances, a silent communication that had developed over months of co-parenting. Olivia nodded slightly, giving Ethan space to respond. We can try, he said, rising from his chair. Let's find a container with air holes. And we'll need to research what butterflies eat and how to care for one with an injured wing. I know they like milkweed, Mia said excitedly. We learned about it in science class. Can we go to the garden store to get some? I think we can manage that, Olivia agreed, standing to join them. Let's get the butterfly settled first, then we'll make a plan. As they moved into the house together. Mia leading the way with her precious cargo, Ethan and Olivia following side by side, the moment struck Ethan with unexpected force. This was what he had been searching for all along. Not achievement or validation or the next adrenaline rush of success. But this. This simple, profound belonging. This family created not through conventional paths but through choices made, mistakes acknowledged, courage finally found. A home where steadiness wasn't mistaken for limitation. Where peace wasn't confused with stagnation. Where the courage to stay had proven greater than the impulse to run. A life built not on fear of what might be lost, but on appreciation for what had been found. Not on constant motion, but on meaningful presence. Not on what could be acquired, but on what could be created together. He hadn't left because he stopped loving her. He had left because he was afraid of who he became with her. Vulnerable, questioning, unable to hide behind achievement or momentum. But in returning, in choosing to stay, in embracing that vulnerability rather than fleeing from it, he had discovered something his younger self couldn't have imagined. That the greatest courage isn't found in walking away, but in remaining present even when presence requires facing yourself. That the most meaningful success isn't measured in acquisitions or accolades, but in the quiet joy of ordinary moments shared with those who see you clearly and love you anyway. That sometimes, if you're very fortunate, life offers second chances to those who finally understand what they missed the first time around, and the wisdom to recognize that gift for the miracle it truly is. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue bringing narratives that remind us it's never too late to choose courage over fear, presence over escape, and love over self-protection. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply stay.